Good morning. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the next session of our Speakers Forum, which is a part of a series with the Go2030 comp plan update. I think everybody in the audience here is pretty familiar with that, but for those that may be listening to the program or watching it on video at a later point, I really encourage you to go to the Go2030.net website. Obviously, there's a lot of information on there. I think we've got up to about 400 individual ideas, suggestions in terms of ways to move forward with our community, and obviously there's a lot of comment and input as a result of those postings, and it's really exciting to see the amount of interest that citizens in our community have had. As part of the Speaker Forum, we're very excited to introduce Wendy Holmes, who is Senior Vice President of Artspace. I hope I got that right. It's really interesting. We actually went out on a tour this morning, and it's very exciting to see the potential. As I understand it, it's really taking older commercial buildings and renovating those buildings to accommodate living space and kind of studio space for artists in the community. So it's very exciting. So with that, I'd like to welcome Wendy Holmes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm honored to be here. I'm here because one of the people in the audience, Mike Williams, met me at a conference in Madison about a month and a half ago, came up to me afterwards and said, "You need to come to Fargo." So now I'm in Fargo. So I work for Artspace, and we are a national nonprofit developer of affordable and sustainable spaces for the arts. And when you think about the arts, I want you to think about all the great cities in this world. And they are great cities partially because arts has transformed them. You think about Rome, New York City, Los Angeles. Arts is one of the first things that pops into your mind as why those places are places that people want to go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact that projects with artists have on communities, as well as the impacts on the individual artists that are part of that. Now, as a city, you're probably more interested in the impact on the neighborhood or the community or how it encourages other kinds of development. But as an individual artist, you're also interested in how does that benefit me personally? How does it benefit my career? How is it that I can be part of a growing community of other artists? So we were established in 1979 by the city of Minneapolis, and we were a department of the city for 1 year before we became a nonprofit. And we were basically a clearinghouse for individual artists to find space in the warehouse district of Minneapolis. And in the mid-'80s, so many artists had come to us and to find space and been kicked out of their space after a year or two of making that block or neighborhood hip and desirable, and then the rents would go up and they'd get kicked out, that we decided, how can we make these spaces sustainable over the long term so that artists can be a part of the vitality and the economic development of a neighborhood without having to be the victims of that? So we became a nonprofit developer of space in the mid-'80s so that we could maintain and own and operate these buildings over the long term so that the artists can be a part of the successful redevelopment of a community without getting displaced. To date, we have 28 projects in 13 states that have been completed. We have 3 under construction, including the Schubert Theater, which you may have heard of. It's a big building that we picked up and moved about 11 years ago, and it opens on September 9th of this year. We have a project in Washington, D.C. under construction, and one in Santa Cruz, California. All told, there are about 1,000 live-work spaces in the buildings that we own and operate, and about 700,000 square feet of non-residential space for creative businesses, nonprofits, frame shops, coffee shops, wine bars, those kinds of compatible uses with individual artist space. Our mission is to create, foster, and preserve affordable space for the arts, just as I was talking about before. That's part of our roots, that's part of who we are. We're not coming into an area and saying, okay, let's figure out how to gentrify this area. Artists will gentrify spaces. There's no question about that. But if they can be part of the rebirth of a community rather than being victims of the rebirth, that's a wonderful thing. So how do art spaces benefit communities? We did an economic impact study with an economist from the University of Minnesota grad school. And she did 2 studies with us. Her name is Ann Gadwa, and she studied with Ann Markison. Some of you may know Ann Markison from the national work that she does with the NEA and the Ford Foundation. And what we looked at is what is the impact on the neighborhood and what is the impact on the artists. So in terms of the impact on communities, we looked at 5 different projects in 3 different cities. And these are the things that we learned, that Artspace animates deteriorated historic structures and or underutilized or vacant properties, bringing vacant or underutilized spaces back on the tax rolls and boosting area property values. We have tangible information about that now, which is huge for us. We're actually releasing this study in September. Fostering the safety and livability of neighborhoods without driving that gentrification-led displacement that I was just referring to. Anchoring arts districts and expanding public access to art, and attracting additional artists, arts-related businesses, nonprofit organizations, and supporting non-arts businesses in the area. So all of these things are a result of a critical mass of artists living, breathing, and working in an area. It's not just what we want, it's what happens. So how do these spaces benefit individual artists? Obviously, they provide affordable space that meets residential and professional needs at affordable rates. They catalyze an arts community where artists can collaborate. They increase artistic production, partly because of peer pressure and partly because you're in a space with other artists and you're inspired. It enhances the professional reputations of the individual artists, and in some cases, their income generated through art activity. We found that artists make more income from their art as a result of living and working in a dense space filled with other artists. Typically, also, these projects create and preserve space for the creative community. They help cities retain artists and your cultural vitality. They help to build safer and more attractive neighborhoods and act as catalysts for other kinds of economic development. So when we look at what are our programs, we do national consulting for groups that want to figure out how to do it themselves. We also do property development, asset management, which means that we maintain the buildings that we redevelop. And then community development is part of everything that we do. You have to get city buy-in, neighborhood buy-in, arts organization buy-in. It has to be a big, kind of messy community process in order to be successful. This is a map of where we're currently working across the country. So blue is where we've done consulting, yellow is where projects are in development or under construction, and red is where projects have been completed. So our process is to, when a community invites us in, sometimes we're coming in for a speaking engagement. If we take it to the next step, typically we do what we call a feasibility study, where we meet with groups of potential stakeholders to see how a project can happen, to get your feedback and to find out what's important to each group. So what's important to your elected officials? What's important to city staff? What's important to the arts organizations and the individual artists and others around the fringes as well, the neighborhood groups that are involved in their neighborhood. And then once we pass that feasibility study phase, we often ask communities to look a little bit deeper. So if you're going to create a space for artists, you have to know that the artists are there. You may instinctively know that they're there and that Fargo has lots and lots of artists, but what kinds of space do they need and what can they afford to pay? Those are really important factors to know. What's their household size? Artists have families too. Don't assume that it's all single people, hermited away, painting or singing or dancing or what have you. A lot of times artists are looking for space for their families as well. So these are important factors to know, and the banking and the financing community that helps support these projects, they don't really understand the artist market typically. So that's why it's good to have tangible, more scientific information about how many artists need space and what kinds of space do they need. So now I'll show you some of the pretty pictures and give you some different examples. We've done both adaptive reuse of historic properties, we've done new construction, and we've done the combination of the two. So these were our first two projects that were completed in downtown St. Paul. I always think it's interesting that we were founded by the city of Minneapolis, but our first projects were in St. Paul. St. Paul was just easier to work with at that time. So these two buildings are filled with 118 units of live-work space. And when I say live-work, I mean an apartment unit that is slightly bigger than a typical market rate unit, so that the artist has room to figure out where to set up a space within the building to do what they do, whether it's singing or dancing, or we have some artists who have created sprung floors for dancing inside their units. You'll see pictures of that in a bit. So there's 118 units of live workspace, and then on the ground floor of the building on your left, there's 50,000 square feet of non-residential space on the ground floor and the first floor, and that is everything from a coffee shop, a Japanese noodle shop, a Zen center, an organization called Springboard for the Arts that provides workshops and other career building advice for individual artists. There's a Latino community organization, there's a dance company, there's a lot of different activity happening in these two buildings. When those artists moved into those buildings, there were about 700 people total living in Lower Town, St. Paul, which is now considered a neighborhood, but at that time didn't really have a name. And now there are, in the last census, there's 3,000 people living in this area of downtown. So across the street are $1 million condominiums on one side, and on the other side there's a farmer's market. And you know, if you've been to Lower Town St. Paul, you know that's kind of the hip and happening part of St. Paul, where all the restaurants are going in and the galleries. And it took many years for that to happen, but the artists were definitely part of being the pioneers to help trip off that change and make people think about how these buildings could be reused. Another example of adaptive reuse, this is an old Masonic temple on Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis. This is about 2 blocks from Target Center, 3 blocks from Target Field. This is a beautiful old Masonic temple that's been converted into 17 different spaces for nonprofit performing organizations. So this building is set up particularly for nonprofit arts organizations, mostly dance companies with a theater on the top. Well, this is a different kind of a building. Most of these are mixed use, not all of them. This one is completely residential, and it's because it's on the other side of the tracks from downtown Houston, and it's in a very difficult to develop area, very industrial. But this building was a beauty. It was called the Jefferson Davis Hospital. Obviously, we had to change the name. When we first started working in Houston, Mike knows this story, we went to the Houston Endowment to ask for support, and they said, "Oh, honey, we don't give money to Yankees." So that's where we had to start. Today it's called the Elder Street Artist Lofts. It was built on the original building was built on a Civil War cemetery. So the part that you see in the front is actually denoting the old graves that were on that site, and under the building